Hi, and welcome to the Uncommon Leadership Interview Series. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams. In this series, I talk with leaders in software like you about their journey to seeing people as people and learning to leverage their unique gifts to best accomplish their goals. Today, I'm chatting with Jeff Griffiths. Jeff is the managing director and co-founder of Workforce Strategies International, a Canadian management consulting firm. They focus on helping clients apply competency and people-based approaches to maximize their operating results and impact. He's had a varied career in the military as an officer in the Canadian Air Force, in the business world in manufacturing and aerospace, and as a certified management consultant for the last 20 plus years. Welcome to Uncommon Leadership, Jeff.
Thanks, Michael, and been a pleasure to be here with you today.
Happy to have you here. Reflecting back over your journey to seeing people as people and leveraging their unique gifts, when did you first recognize that that might be valuable?
I think I'd have to go back all the way to my military career, and the thing that really made it stick out for me was a particular assignment that I had when I was in the Air Force. The Canadian military, for your listeners who aren't from Canada, is tiny compared to militaries in most places. So we never really had enough of anything, except things to do. And I was the operations officer on a very small, tiny by American standards, mobile radar air defense radar squadron. And we were tasked to go down onto the actually the southern U.S. border to do a counter narcotics operation. And this was in the early 1990s when that was a thing. Anyway, the point of it was we went down there with everything we owned and 12 people and operated more or less autonomously and for a couple of months, and with never more than, after we got the radar set up, never more than 3 people out on the radar at any given time at the actual operations site. And when they replaced us, eventually the unit that was sent in to replace us brought 75 people to do the same job, which amazed me. And that really got me thinking, like, how was it that it was possible for us to do this with so few people and do it as well as we were capable of doing it? And it wasn't because we were elite. It wasn't because we were a hand-picked team. Like all military units, we had a lot of churn, a lot of turnover. New people would post in every year, experienced people would post out, and we'd sort of have to shuffle the deck and figure out, well, how are we going to make this work now? And what I realized was that it was because we were using what I've since come to term whole person competency, using every single skill and capability that people had, whether it was part of their job description or not, and then giving them the opportunity to learn how to do even more things. We were able to punch way above our weight in terms of what we could do. And so I've been trying to apply that in other fields ever since. This notion that if you look at people as more than their job description, if you work from strength and you give people an opportunity to do things that they actually enjoy doing, and you cross train and add skill, constantly adding skill to people, you wind up with capabilities that you on paper aren't supposed to be possible, and you basically create an organization that can then think its way to a solution, and do things that are way beyond its brief, and you're future proof. And I think that's really the genesis of it, and I've been kind of working on that for the time ever since. So that's like going on 35 years now.
You said you were replaced with a 75-person team. How big was your team?
We had 12.
12.
And that's operations, maintenance, and everything. And So yeah, tiny. Like,
Yeah.
and that wasn't like we only brought 12, like we only had 12.
Right. Yeah.
And we weren't going to get any more. So that was the gist of it. And I think that's at a time fairly typical of the Canadian military, is that we were constantly trying to do things without the resources to do them.
And has that been a theme through your career, that you're always coming in with this, or working with this little tiny team, trying to do as much as some much bigger team?
I mean, I've seen it over and over again in, you know, in my, when I got out of the military, working in the aerospace sector. Again, small, proficient teams that can trade off each other's strengths, that are not necessarily bound by you know, the constraints of job description and organizational structure, always seem to be able to get more done. And I mean, you can go back even through history, you know, the kind of skunk works operations, and some of the amazing things that you know, that like Lockheed was able to do through their skunk works with relatively small groups of people that just had the, you know, they had the leashes taken off of them. You know, and I've seen it in, again, in other spaces, other places, in manufacturing as well. I mean, there's a lot of process in manufacturing, but allowing people to work beyond the process and do, you know, use all of their skills in all the different ways that they're capable of, is it just drives like quantum you know, leaps and bounds in productivity and innovation and everything else. And we've seen it in many different environments.
Yeah. How much of the time are you doing this? Everybody do what they love doing, and let's leave the rest to everyone else who's going to love some part of that. How much of the time is this visible, or told to people outside the team, management up especially, that this is what you're doing? And how much are you just doing and no one else notices?
I think it depends on the organization. We've found it's a lot easier to implement this stuff on the fringes, right? So if you have a small organization, or a, you know, like I said, a little skunk works thing, organization within an organization, you tend to be able to do this in a smaller organization, where you can work through with, you know, with the, like the entire team in this way. It's certainly easier to do. A lot of larger organizations have a real difficult time with this, because no one likes to have a rogue, you know, a rogue cell running around inside. So, you know, when we've done it in, say, in manufacturing, it's always been in a one plant, or sometimes maybe it's the prototyping cell, or maybe it's, you know, it's a portion of an operation. And then when the results start coming in and people start asking questions like, how the heck are you able to do that? And that's when, you know, that's when it starts becoming viral and seeping out through the rest of the organization. And I mean, I worked in for a company that did, you know, kind of software engineering integration for in the aerospace sector, and that's about as heavily process oriented as you can get, right? I mean, we were a CMMI level 5 compliant operation, which means we lived and died by our processes, and yet when we started to do some of this stuff within, say, integrated logistics support within those larger projects, we were able to generate incredible results very quickly with a very small footprint. And again, when the management starts seeing this, they start asking questions. And then you got to fess up and let them know what you've been up to. And if they're smart, then they start filtering it through the rest of the organization.
Right. I really like that example, because it shows that even when you have a highly regulated space or a lot of process that you have to comply with, you still have the freedom to implement this sort of approach.
I think so. It's a lot of it, I think, it comes from leadership. Managers have to be willing to let go. And you lose control to gain control, I guess. And that's scary, right? To say, hey, I'm just going to take my hands off the steering wheel, and we're just going to let this thing happen. And I mean, that's terrifying. It's a terrifying environment to be in. But in a rapidly changing world, you can't have, as leaders, your job is to set the table and let people eat. It's not to feed them, right? And so we need to get out of that I need to control every aspect mindset that exists in a lot of organizations, and certainly in a lot of managers.
So when you've been faced with someone who has that I need to control everything mindset, how have you helped them turn into oh, I just need to set the table, not actually feed you also?
Yeah, well, I'm one of the examples when we were working back a few years, we were working in the manufacturing sector, and we took all of the leadership out of the plant, and we were sitting down with them. It was like an offsite meeting at a hotel a few miles away from the plant, and we banned cell phones. No one was allowed to bring a cell phone into the room, so they couldn't be constantly checking on what was going on in the plant. And we had an interesting discussion, like, what is it that you do and why is that important and everything else? And then the question is, so who's doing it now? And I was amazed, like it's kind of a stupid question, but I was amazed at the number of light bulbs you could see going off around the room where they realized, holy crap, I am not there. And the plant's not burning down. Production is still happening. Stuff is still getting done, and we didn't kill anybody. The safety record was just fine, right? And we kept them out of there for 2 whole days and let the people run things because they knew how, and solve problems as they went, and then find out about it later. And again, it was a absolutely terrifying experience for some of those managers. But I think they came out of it with a real sense of, hey, you know what, maybe I don't have to do this. And sometimes that kind of shock treatment is the only thing you can do, right? I mean, everybody looks at examples and everything else. Yeah, but that's not here. It'll never work here. And we were in a position where we literally forced it on them and said, well, that's the way it's got to be. And they may have reverted back to type after we got finished with them, but it was an interesting next few weeks working on improvements and things like that within the organization, because they were much more willing to let go and let people do their thing, because they had it's a lot of it is a question of trust as well, right? But the reality is, if they haven't built their team up where they can trust them to do their jobs, then they haven't done their job.
Right? Yes.
So,
yeah.
And again, I think that comes out of my military background, because I mean, we were the only thing, for your listeners who've never been in the military, right? Certainly my military, the Canadian military, for the longest time, we weren't fighting wars or doing that kind of stuff. We were doing an awful lot of training, and the only thing the military is really good at, and always has been, is building people, on the presumption that bad things happen, and I always came to work saying, well, I'm a lieutenant, but I could be the battalion commander by lunchtime if everything goes sideways.
Right.
And so that mindset always exists. I have to train. I have to build up the people who are 1 and 2 and 3 layers below me, because I might not be here to manage it all myself. And certainly when we were doing an operational evaluation in the military, the first thing you would do, if you saw that there were key personnel who were driving everything as an exercise umpire, the first thing you would do is you would kill them off. And now let's see if they really know, if this unit really knows what it's doing, or is it really leader dependent? And again, in the private sector, we don't see that mindset really. And yet that's the primary role of leadership, is to release the potential, to grow and release the potential of their people. And so sometimes they have to learn that the hard way.
And the same potential that anyone through that leadership structure might disappear tomorrow because someone in their family gets COVID, because there's a hurricane that runs through their backyard, or
Yep.
they're
Yeah.
just in a traffic accident,
Or they get a better job.
or they get a better job.
Right.
Um,
You know, and so you have to build a resiliency into the organization, and that comes from taking taking a lot of the constraints off of action and allowing people to use all of their skills and apply them in the world. And you know, again, we learned it. I don't think it was a conscious decision at first. It was out of necessity. Once we realized what was going on, then we were actually very intentional about making sure that we understood where everybody could do all the things they could do, things they were doing even outside of work, that we could find ways to give them opportunities to apply on the job. And yeah, I mean, we were able to do the work of units, you know, 6 times our size.
how do you identify that information? How do you figure out that Joe is great at crafting a story around what's going on, and Miranda is fantastic at making things pretty, or making code pretty, while Mohammed is great at like keeping the team morale up, or whatever the different things are that need to get done?
I mean, the short answer is, simple answer is, well, you ask. Before anybody will actually tell you, though, you have to you have to build trust again. So it's really on leadership to create the trust and the openness around these things, and demonstrate that you know, that why you're doing it and what you're trying to do. And it's not about, well, I want you to do all kinds of things that you're not being paid to do. It's, I want to give you the opportunity to do things that you know, and value the strengths and the capabilities that you have in the context of the things that we're paying you to do. And it becomes you know, it's not an overnight process either. You have to work your way towards it. Again, if I go back to the the little radar that could, the thing for us, we had a like a squadron hockey team, and again, it's a Canadian thing, right? So we had a hockey team, and which was also small because we had a small unit, and we were, you know, playing against much bigger units within our wing, and we developed that understanding and trust and break down the hierarchy and the rank structure. So like myself and the commanding officer, we were just like third pair defensemen, right? We weren't in charge of the hockey team. We had privates and corporals who knew what they were doing, who did that. And then that kind of bled over into some of the other things we were doing. So through the way you manage work on the job, the way you trust people on the job, build trust with people on the job, the way you find opportunities and offer opportunities for people to use all of their strengths and skills, over time, that builds up your understanding of what it is that people can do, but also people's willingness to experiment. And the other piece of it is, if you're giving people stuff to do that's outside of their, you know, the parameters of their job description, you have to make sure it's a no-fault environment. Like, no one should get fired for stepping over the line, right? And again, so that's why it's easier to do this in, you know, in a skunk works type of an environment, but it's not impossible to do it in within a larger firm.
Do you have any tips or tricks for helping for doing that in those larger groups?
Finding out what people are good at?
And building that trusting environment where it's safe to go outside the boundary of what you know that you can do and you know that your people can do, and let them sort of fail in a safe way.
We find one of the areas, and again we'll go back to experience in manufacturing and in other environments, is you can build a lot of that trust and a lot of this mindset through improvement projects and improvement teams within the organization, where especially if the leaders are not running things, and we discourage managers from running things. They can participate in them. We don't want them running them, where it provides that opportunity for people to start thinking and start checking, start experimenting. So through, the usual many organizations where we've been, Kaizen is sort of this thing that gets inflicted on the organization by a bunch of outside consultants. It's not a way of life. And everybody just kind of holds their breath until the consultants leave, and then we go back to doing things, like we always did. But if you can build up through, little improvements, small improvements, little things that we can do at a team level, and make the teams responsible for figuring it out and implementing it and making it work, over time, you can create that level of trust as well as that confidence to experiment. It requires a lot of patience. And it requires a leader who's willing to stand up in front of the boss and say, well, when things go right, it's their fault. When things go wrong, it's my fault, and you can blame me, and wear it, right? Instead of pointing down at somebody down in the down the line and saying, well, it was their idea, which you do that once and that's it, you're done, right? You'll never get an innovation out of a team again.
Yeah. Is there something that you're working on now that's stretching your abilities in this area?
We're consultants. We're constantly stretching our abilities. I mean, we're building a team internally, which is neat because it's kind of practice what you preach. We've been doing some work in like the biotechnology space, where you're working with you have obviously the big multinational firms, that like the name names, right? The Pfizers and the Mercks and everybody else. But you have so much of this happening, and literally is like, 4 people around a test tube kind of stuff, like literally the garage band operation. And then they try to scale. And it's an interesting dynamic. We're working with a group, an innovative group now that's working with some really, really, really cool technology. And they need to scale in order and without, again, they never have enough of anything, but scale up production, scale up their processes and that, using whatever people they happen to have lying around. And yet the mindset of the engineers who are involved in it is, we have to build a machine, cogs in the wheel, right? Everything's got to be structured. And we're saying, no, actually, let's take let's try something else. Let's try letting your organization grow and innovate, and that the way you and your 3 partners did when you were figuring this out in the first place. And and how do we make that happen, and what other skills do we have to provide for these people, and what supports do we have to provide so they can do this? And that's a real challenge, right? And it's a challenge with any entrepreneur. The last thing an entrepreneur wants to do is give up control, and yet it's the most important job, right, if you want to scale and grow. So we're running into that right now, as I say, with one of our clients, and it's a fascinating environment. It's like a little laboratory to play around with this stuff, and they're making progress and making some interesting things happen. But we have to constantly be going back again to the leadership to tell them, let's just let's just see what they can do. Let's give it some time, right? Because everybody wants to jump in and fix it.
Right. Yeah. What's your favorite story? And this may be the one you opened with, of a time where leveraging people's unique strengths just really took off in a profoundly successful and also unexpected way.
Well, obviously you've heard the story of the little radar that could, which is probably my favorite story about I mean, we saw even in well, let's use it a totally not business example. Okay. I, like many parents, was once shafted to be the coach of a soccer team. And it wasn't a very good soccer team. And they weren't very proficient. So like we were like out of 4 possible divisions, we were like 4B or something, right? I mean, we were like bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
But we had, these are kids, right? They run around, they do what they do. Myself and my one of the other parents, who was wound up being the assistant coach, had to try and make something out of this, right? And it was interesting to watch the progression of the kids over a season, because at the beginning, it's, if you've ever watched kids sports, it's like there's really only 2 positions, right? There's I've got the ball and I don't have the ball, right? And there's this just massive little bodies running around all over the place. So it's very directive, it's very authoritative, it's very controlling, mostly because they don't know any better. And then we made a conscious effort to add, every game we would take a little step further back, a little step further back. By the end of the season, the kids were figuring out on their own. They developed their own, internal communications across the team. We knew who the leaders were. They knew who the leaders were. They knew who was capable of doing what. They learned to trust each other. And all we had to do was make sure there were oranges and water on the sidelines as coaches, which was great, right? Made our job a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah.
And that happened organically over the course of about 12 weeks, right? When you only have them for a practice and a game a week. And we watched that development. And I think the same thing can happen in organizations. Obviously, the stakes are a little different in organization. But I think it just proves what is possible when you take that kind of intentional approach to giving up control.
Yeah. The stakes are different in business. The time and investment necessary to help this happen doesn't have to be any more than what you did with those soccer kids.
I don't think so. I mean, we always say, we can turn things around and really change the direction your organization is going in 90 days. Right. So what's 90 days? That's how many
3
weeks
months.
is that? Yeah. Right. So 12 weeks-ish.
12 weeks. Yeah.
Right. Which is about the length of a minor soccer season. And what we found is, if again, it's not easy. And the other thing that changes in the business world, and I guess is what's different when you're dealing with, minor soccer players or hockey players or whatever, is you'll have people on the teams with different capabilities. You'll have people who are really, really good. You'll have people that aren't. You'll have people that are very experienced. You'll have people that are very inexperienced. And so it's a different dynamic. But the principle is the same. You still need to understand what that dynamic looks like. You still have to find ways of releasing that potential and growing the experience level and the capabilities of the less experienced or less capable by using the talent that surrounds them from within the team, not necessarily having to direct it all as the leader. And so it's an iterative process, but I think you can accomplish an awful lot in a very, very short period of time. And success feeds on itself. It's self-reinforcing, right? In a lot of ways, it's like raising a puppy. And I always say we should work like dogs. And people give me the sort of stink eye about that. But when you think about, I have Labrador retrievers, and when you look at a dog working, I mean, we should all be so lucky, right? It totally focused, doing work that they love, doing, using all of their skills, doing something that they were born and bred to do. And the best reward is they get to come back tomorrow and do it again. Mm-hmm. Right? If we all worked in that kind of an environment, wouldn't the world be great? And the secret to training a dog is to never let them make a bad enough mistake, like build on success, build on strength, work with their individual capabilities and bring them along, a step at a time. And, probably get you'll probably get hate mail for this, but and people aren't actually all that different, right? there's more dynamics at play, but the principles are very similar, and everybody likes to be successful. And so as a leader, your job is to make it so that people are successful and not necessarily find ways to tell them that they're not. Right?
Yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful.
I find it helpful. Yeah, I'm sure my audience will too. And that reminds me that Danny Weinberg, who is married to Jerry Weinberg, industry legend, trained dogs for a long time using basically that process. And she came to that after, and I think also during working with Jerry, consulting to companies, helping them do these same things. And in her book, she more or less says exactly what you did, that the way you work with people and the way you work with dogs is exactly the same way. Catch them doing things right, help them, push them a little bit in the direction that you want them to get, sort of guide them and lure them in, and amazing things happen. Yeah.
And again, and that becomes self-reinforcing. And it's a wonderful environment to work in, and we like to think we're a little more sophisticated than that. But in the end, you scratch deep enough, we're all animals, and there are certain things that just seem to work. So I'm not saying that everybody, treat everybody like a dog. But I am saying that the psychology of reinforcement and working from strength, it's been proven over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And we know it works.
Absolutely.
In fact, we've known for decades that it works. Right, going back to research that was conducted as far back as the 40s and the 50s. So that makes it older than me even, right? And and we've known, and I mean, Dan Pink wrote a whole book about it around, his book Drive talks all about, some of the research that tells us how to motivate and drive performance out of people by taking the reins off and taking the constraints off and letting them be the best that they can be.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground today. What else should I ask you?
Yeah, that's always a tough question. What else should I ask? I mean, one of the things you can ask me about, identifying competency, because that's sort of bread and butter work for us, and it's one of the areas where we find managers they think they know it, but they don't actually do it very well. So
how do you do that in 3 minutes or less?
Okay, in 3 minutes or less, it really starts, and again, we make this a team effort. People who are doing the job generally know what doing the job right looks like and what it takes to do the job right, and managers aren't necessarily the best people in the best position to do it. So again, engendering the trust by actually working with competent people, defining within a framework, within a structure, what competent performance looks like, and what are the underlying things that lead to competent performance and the visible evidence that someone is competent, and letting the individuals, the team members, work that on their own without necessarily management being involved in it, other than to support the effort, really helps to lay out the essence of it. The problem with getting consultants and managers involved in is it becomes way too complicated, because we have a tendency of doing that. And you can boil down the critical things that someone needs to be able to do or on almost any job into 10, 12, 15 measurable things that you can manage to every day, and then build from there. And then you add on, okay, well, what else can you do? Right? Because no one is their job description. And that, for me, that's the critical step in driving this. And it shouldn't be an activity that's ran by HR. It needs to happen at the team level by the line management and their personnel.
And
So
what else
how'd
can you do?
I do for 3 minutes?
I wasn't timing. It was about right. And what else can you do? I love that question. I'm going to take that. What do you want to leave our audience with?
I guess if there's one message, it's that, like I think, and I've said it over and over, nobody is their job description. And organizations are not machines. And if you want to see the potential, and allow an organization to punch above its weight and do amazing things, you have to start recognizing that every single person in the organization is the sum total of everything they have ever done and everything they have ever learned. And to the extent that you as a leader can capture that and apply that and release that into your organization, the better your results will be, the higher your quality, the lower your turnover, the higher your levels of engagement. And it's scary as it may be, never lose sight of it.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Jeff, for this fun and edifying conversation today. How can people reach you?
The easiest way is to email me directly. So jeff@workforcestrat.com. I'm sure you'll put this into the show notes.
Yep.
I'm on LinkedIn. If look me up, Jeff Griffiths at Workforce Strategies International. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. We're publishing stuff all the time. Most of what I'm talking about isn't particularly sophisticated, and I'm glad to discuss it with anybody who's interested.
Great. Thanks. And if you'd like to learn more about the work that I do, head over to uncommonteams.com. You'll find more episodes of this interview series there. And if you'd like more great conversations like the one with Jeff today, then sign up for my newsletter, top of every page on my site. Thanks so much. Have an edifying day.